Hello and welcome to Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Larry Rhodes.
And I am Ben Snyder, and we want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists and agnostics. This is a show for them and for people curious about living a life free of supernatural beliefs.
So true. This is a call-in show. However, we only have one phone line, so if you can't get through, we invite you to tweet them or your comments or questions to us at FFTV Knox.
The Rationalists of East Tennessee have monthly activities on the first and third Sundays of the month, which are lectures and lively roundtable discussions. The second Sunday of the month, they have a book club that meets at Barnes & Noble's. The fourth Sunday, they have Reflections Gathering, which is a potluck afternoon gathering at a member's home.
Mm-hmm. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun meetup, often at a bar or restaurant. Tonight's meetup is at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for happy hour after the show for food, drink, and conversation. And Friday, we usually meet for happy hour at Bearden Beer Market. To find us at either one of these locations, just look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table.
Mm-hmm. So today is September 18th, 2012, and we will be talking with Greta Christina, who is an author and blogmeister.
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Hold on just a minute. Greta, I'm sorry, we're having a little technical difficulty.
You don't have your...
I don't have my mic on.
Oh.
Okay.
All right.
We have taken care of the technical difficulties.
Right. Sorry, Greta. Please go ahead.
And
Hi.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me on your show.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. We'll be talking, I guess, a lot about the information that you put in your new book. You put a book, got a book out called "Why Are You Atheists So Angry?" Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. I wrote this book because a lot of religious believers have been asking a lot of atheists this question: why are you atheists so angry? I don't think it's a surprise to anybody in the atheist, agnostic, freethought community that, atheism has been very much in the public eye lately, and as a result, atheist anger has been very much in the public eye, and atheist anger about religion is on a lot of people's minds, and there's a lot of religious believers who react to this with this sense of surprise. Why are all of a sudden there are these angry atheists coming out of nowhere? And so I wrote this book partly to explain this phenomenon of atheist anger and very visible atheist anger to religious believers. And also, I wrote this book for atheists. A lot of atheists have told me that they find that the book gave them words for ideas and feelings that they had been thinking about and feeling but hadn't really been able to put into words. And it's helped them to explain their ideas and their feelings and their attitudes towards the other people in their life. And a lot of people have told me that it's motivated them to take action and to get more involved in the atheist community and the atheist movement. And so that's a lot of what the book is about how anger, there's this attitude that, if you're angry, there's something wrong with you, it must be, and especially if you're an atheist and you're angry, there's something wrong with you. And that it's because you're bitter, it's because you're unhappy, it's because you have a God-shaped hole in your heart or whatever. And a lot of the point of this book is that atheists are angry because we have legitimate things to be angry about. And that when you see terrible harm being done in the world, and when you see terrible injustice being done in the world, anger is an appropriate response. When I look at the terrible harm that's done in the name of religion, I think anger is an appropriate response. I don't want to be complacent. When I see these things, I want to be angry because that's what motivates me to do something about it.
Well, you used the phrase right there, terrible harm. Can you go into some of the reasons why you think that, and I agree with you on a lot of these, why religion actually does terrible harm?
that I talk about in the book are, an example is women who are in fundamentalist Christian churches are often counseled by their preachers to stay in abusive marriages. You know, if they're being beaten by their husbands, they're told by their preachers, you have to stay because, you know, God says marriage is forever, and God says it's your fault and you must have done something wrong, and it's your position as a woman to obey and to submit. That's a terrible form of harm.
Yeah.
I think about gay kids who are kicked out of their home by their families. There's a statistic I saw I was in Salt Lake City just recently, and I saw the statistic saying that in Salt Lake City, Utah, 40% of all homeless teenagers are gay, and most of them are kids who've been kicked out of their house by their Mormon families. You know, I think about things like the fact that, you know, until very recently, the majority of Americans said that they wouldn't vote for an atheist under any circumstances, even if they agreed with them on all the positions. And that number just recently went over 50%, but it's just barely over 50%. Almost half of Americans would not vote for an atheist for any reason. You know, I think about things like when Jessica Alquist, the high school student in Rhode Island, who asked her public high school to take a prayer banner out of the school, which is illegal. They're not supposed to be doing that. The government-sponsored school is not supposed to be sponsoring religion.
Right.
They had this big prayer banner in their school. So she had, first of all, she had to sue them to get them to take it down. And when she did that, she was targeted with this tremendous barrage of hatred and threats and bullying from her classmates and, you know, from her community in general. You know, I think about things like, you know, the incredible oppression of women in Islamist theocracies, the fact that women in Islamic theocracies are beaten and arrested and killed, you know, for things like, you know, like committing adultery, but also even for things like just having male friends, or, you know, things like not obeying their male relatives. You know, I think about genital mutilation that happens to little girls in Islamic theocracies. So there's this tremendous litany. I could go on and on and on for a long time, and that's a lot of what the book is talking about these specific examples of terrible harm that's caused by religion.
Greta, I've seen you talk about this on a video on YouTube. You did a speech on this subject, and one of the things that stuck out to me from that speech that I really thought was very thought-provoking was when you were talking about how people tell atheists and such, and really it's told to, you pointed out, to a lot of different people of a lot of different movements, that being angry hurts your movement, and that you should be more polite, less angry. And you made excellent points, I thought, regarding how important anger is to the life of a movement and keep it going. I didn't know if you had any more you'd like to say to that, or about that.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the most common things that gets, you know, when atheists talk about our anger about religion, people will say, oh, but anger is hurting your movement, it's not helping your movement, you're alienating people, and you know, when you look at the history of other social change movements, you see that that's not true at all. Anger is hugely beneficial to a movement. Anger does a number of things. For one thing, anger motivates people. It motivates people to take action. You know, a lot of, you know, when you look at the LGBT movement or the civil rights movement or the women's movement or even the environmental movement, you know, people, you know, the labor movement, you know, people take action in these movements because they're angry. They're angry about harm and injustice that's being done to them. They're angry at harm and injustice that they see being done to other people, and they're motivated to take action. And, you know, anger also has the effect of drawing attention to your movement. You know, if people are nice and polite and sweet and diplomatic, and I'm not downplaying that. I do think that there's a very important role for that in a social change movement. But if what you're trying to do is get attention, if you're trying to get on the news, if you're trying to get people to news reporters to write about you, if you're trying to get media attention and so on, anger is one of the most effective ways of doing that.
One point we'd like to make, though, for everybody to understand that anger does not mean violence. I mean, you can be angry, justifiably angry over several things, but if you're not hurting people, then it can be very constructive. If you start hurting people, then it's another problem altogether.
Right.
Exactly, and that's one of the things I talk about about in the book. Anger doesn't mean violence, and anger doesn't mean hatred, and anger doesn't mean bigotry. Anger is an emotional response to seeing things in the world that are wrong, and it's what motivates you to take action and do something about it.
Right, following the political avenues for that. You don't want to start taking the law in your own hand. One of the things I ask people when they ask me why I'm angry, I say, why aren't you? When you see children being denied health care in the name of religion, when you see kids being brainwashed into thinking that evolution is not correct, there are several things like that really kind of tease me up, and I wonder why other people who share the beliefs that I do aren't angry about that.
Well, exactly. And, when you look at, certainly you have a right when there's harm being done to you. You have the right to make your own decision about, am I going to be angry about this and get worked up about it, or am I going to let it go? But when I see harm that's done to other people, when I see injustice that's done to other people, the things you talk about, I see children being denied health care because their parents believe in faith healing. And, sometimes children just suffer horribly and even die.
And die.
I see things like there's, in many states in the United States, religiously based child care centers don't have to adhere to safety standards, and they don't have to be licensed. And again, children have suffered and died. And I look at this and I think the opposite of anger in this case is not, peace or calm. The opposite of anger is complacency.
Apathy.
And I'm totally with you. It's like I look at these things and I say, why aren't you angry? What's wrong with you?
Right.
And there's, I think, an important point about that, which is that a lot of atheist anger is anger on other people's behalf. Some of it is anger about ways that atheists are mistreated, and of course that's totally valid. But a lot of it is anger about how religious believers are mistreating each other. It's anger on behalf. And it's motivated by a sense of compassion and by a sense of justice.
Yes.
Not because we're selfish or whiny. It's because we want the world to be a better place.
That's right.
Right. One of the best examples that came to my attention the last few years was over in Africa. Christianity has been spreading among the different tribes and cities and so forth there, and there's arisen this group of exorcists who are basically blaming children for their parents' financial problems or economic status, or even for bad weather, bad crops, and they perform these exorcisms saying that the child is a witch. And what happens then is that they have and it's very disturbing. I've seen documentaries on this now. That there's a large population of homeless, mistreated, abused, and children who wind up being killed. Children who are supposedly exorcised witches, but the parents neglect them, throw them out, and will not have anything to do with them as a result of that.
And those children are now at risk from predators and from
and mob violence,
as well as the jungle predators. We got a question from the audience, and I thought you might want to try to handle it. How do you think the everyday atheist should channel their anger constructively to help the movement, help the world?
That is a really good question. That's actually one of my favorite questions. Honestly, what I think the everyday atheist to do to channel their anger is whatever they're inspired to do. Again, within reason. I'm not encouraging, violence or bigotry or anything like that. But I think that there's a lot of different appropriate responses to anger. I think that if you want to be out there picketing and protesting, if you want to be, for instance, picketing the Mormon Church about their attitude towards same-sex marriage and, gay rights, if you want to be getting into arguments with people on the internet and trying to persuade people out of religion, if you want to be engaging in really confrontational activism, I think that's excellent. I also think that it's totally appropriate if what you're inspired to do by your anger is to form a community, is to show up at your local atheist or humanist community and say, I want to help out. I want to make a safe place to land for people who are leaving religion. I want to start the Atheist Bowling League. I want to start the Atheist Knitting Circle. If you want to put up billboards that say you can be good without God. I think that there's lots and lots and lots of really appropriate and really wonderful responses to anger. And honestly, the form of activism that I most encourage people to take is to come out of the closet as atheists, as much as they can and if they can. I know it's not safe for everybody, but that's the main thing I really want to encourage people to do, is to come out as atheists, because that's the number one thing that will help us change the view of atheism and change people's, I think, also change people's view of religion. And apart from that, really, I want people to do whatever form of activism they're inspired to do, because, you know, activism is hard and people do burn out on it. And if you're doing something that you love doing, you're a lot more likely to stick with it for a long time.
One of the most at-risk group of people when they come out are high school kids. Would you have any advice for them at this point?
That's a really good question. I'm actually working now on a new book that's hopefully going to come out early next year. That's a coming out guide for atheists of all stripes. And, you know, high school students, and, you know, there's going to be a section on students and a section on people in the military and people in the clergy and people in, you know, fundamentalist homes and so on. For high school students, the number one thing I would do is contact the Secular Student Alliance. They are an organization that's specifically founded to help support both high school and college students, and they can help you start a support group and, you know, start a group in your school and get going with that. Apart from that, I would say, honestly, be a little bit careful if you're a high school student. If you think that your parents are going to give you a hard time, if you think that they're going to kick you out of the house, if you think that they're not going to fund your college education, you might hold off on coming out until you feel like it's really safe for you to do so. Something that you can really do is find online community and online support, because that's something you can do anonymously and privately.
And
there's
Meetup was really
lots
good. Meetup was really good about that. I started a Meetup group 10 years ago, and a lot of people can join that anonymously or under a pseudonym, no matter what their age is, and it gets them into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely find support. I would say start by finding support online anonymously, and again, contact the Secular Student Alliance. They can give you a lot of good pointers. And then, you know, when you do, if you do feel like you want to come out to your family, there's a lot of different things that I would say, but the main thing I would say is, you know, is to have patience, because sometimes, don't assume that because, you know, if it starts out that you're having a big fight, it's likely going to get better with time. And, you know, you need to give your folks, you know, time to get used to the idea. But definitely, you know, wait until you're pretty sure that it's safe to do so before you come out. You don't want to be in a situation where if your family does alienate you, you don't have any place to go.
I would like to take a moment just to remind our listeners that this is a call-in show. You can call in and talk to us or talk directly to Greta Christina. You can call the number on the screen, 865-215-2288. Phone lines are open now. Did you have some questions that you wanted to get into?
Oh, no. No, that can wait.
Okay.
So it's also very interesting that it does take religious people by surprise that atheists could be angry or be upset, because they often view themselves, religious people that is, as being a very positive force in the world and being very self-assured that they are on the side of justice and all that is righteous and holy.
And when anybody takes exception to it, you're persecuting them instead of like standing up for the underdog.
Well, and definitely one of the things that I write about a lot, and I write about it in the book as well as other places, is this idea that religion has kind of gotten a free ride. You know, in the marketplace of ideas, religion has kind of gotten to ride to the marketplace in an armored car. You know, we have this idea in our culture that criticizing religion or even questioning religion is rude, that's intolerant, that it's bigoted. We certainly have this idea that simply to be religious makes you a good person, and that, of course, the flip side of that, to not be religious means that you're a bad person. And so when atheists, first of all, even when we just come out of the closet and say we're atheists, that just by itself is often seen as, you know, so confrontational, so, why do you have to be so in your face by, you know, saying that you exist? And certainly there's this idea that religion should be protected from criticism. And one of the things that I think is really important to remember is religion is an idea about the world. It's an idea about how the world works. And when you, in the marketplace of ideas, in the public forum, we criticize every other kind of idea about how the world works. We criticize ideas about science and about politics and about medicine and so on. And we don't think twice about it. In fact, it's considered to be a positive thing. Mm-hmm. And yet when we criticize religion and we say, well, actually, we don't think there's a lot of good evidence that religion is true, and we think that there's a fair amount of evidence that religion actually does more harm than good, mm-hmm. people react as if the mere asking of that question, the mere questioning of religion mm-hmm. is this horrible insult. And I think that that's something that, again, simply by coming out of the closet and by saying that we don't believe in God, we call that into question. Mm-hmm. We call that whole idea that you have to be religious to be a good person. Right. Just coming out really calls it into question.
It's kind of funny to me that whenever you bring up the fact that you're an atheist or you don't believe in God, immediately the person that you're talking to, if they're religion, they ask questions. And mm-hmm. my immediate thought is, why don't they ask questions before they talk to you? They generally don't. The hands don't go up until they're talking to somebody who doesn't believe. But then the questions are usually designed to bring you back into the fold anyway.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think it largely goes back, like you said, it is an idea. It is a meme that's been going on for quite some time, and religious beliefs, especially when they involve eternal punishment or reward, have a built-in mechanism that tries to ensure its continuation by means of fear or hope. But also you have this. I was talking to someone about this online who was a Christian. That it's interesting because the fact that believing in whether or not you believe these claims determines whether or not you would be punished or rewarded is very curious and very disturbing. And so when you come out and say you are an atheist, you don't believe in Christianity, you don't believe in Islam or anything like that, you're saying something about yourself that in their minds is something that is wrong, that is bad, deserving of punishment. Mm-hmm.
Well, there's this basic problem, of course, with religion, which is, and again, this is something I talk about in the book, mm-hmm. is that one of the fundamental problems with religion is that there's no reality check on it. It is this belief in, again, that if you even, in many cases, lots of religions say that if you even question the tenets of the faith, that you're going to burn in hell and so on. But it's ultimately, there's all these different religions. There's, thousands of different religions, tens of thousands if you look at all the religions through history. And they all have different ideas. They all have different ideas about what do you have to do to go to heaven? What do you have to do to go to hell? What does God want us to do? What does God not want us to do? Mm-hmm. And none of the people who believe it have any way of proving or showing any good evidence mm-hmm. for why their version of God and their version of heaven or hell or the afterlife is the right one. Right. And it's, certainly there's lots of bad ideas in the world. Religion's far from the only one. And there's lots of bad ideas mm-hmm. that inspire people to take bad actions. Again, religion's not the only one. Yeah. But religion is unique. Religion is really unique because it's this belief in the invisible. It's, the God who's supposedly giving you all these rules is mm-hmm. invisible. And it's this invisible being with speaking in an audible voice that only a handful of privileged people can hear, and we're perfectly happy to tell the rest of us what he thinks. The afterlife is invisible. Nobody can show that it exists. Mm-hmm. And because of that, there's no reality check on the idea. Right. There's no way to show, if somebody has a bad idea about science or about medicine, you can show them evidence. You can say, well, actually, this particular treatment doesn't really work, and it actually does harm, and this other treatment is better. And ultimately, you can persuade them out of it. But if what they believe is somebody who's invisible and there's no way to show one way or the other, then there's no way to talk them out of this bad idea. And then, as you said, it's kind of self-perpetuating mm-hmm. because if what you believe in is a God who's going to punish you by sending you for eternal torment mm-hmm. for even asking questions,
you cannot refuse.
Then that really self-perpetuates this very bad idea.
Yes.
I had once had a friend that was commenting on Facebook, and she was telling her fellow Christians, she says, remember to do whatever God tells you to do. She used the word Jesus, no matter how crazy.
Yeah.
And I reminded her that there are a lot of people out there who get all kinds of ideas, and to think that it comes from the creator of the universe, which they cannot refuse to do it under pain of eternal punishment, they could go out and do any kind of things, and have in the course of humanity have done all kinds of crazy things, thinking that the command came from God.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. You know, and that's the point. Is if you believe that God is telling you whatever crazy thing it is, how are you supposed to tell the difference between God telling you and just voices in your head telling you? And how are you supposed to, or just the preacher telling you, and you're supposed to trust that he's telling you the right thing? And how are you supposed to tell the difference if God is telling you, it's like to, for instance, fly an airplane into a building? Don't you have some moral obligation to question whether or not that's true? My friend JT Eberhard, he writes a blog called What Would JT Do? And he gives a lot of talks, and one of the things he talks about a lot is how we have a moral obligation to try to understand how the world works. We have a moral obligation to be reasonable and to look at the evidence of what's true and what's not true. And again, you look at, for instance, faith healing. If you believe that God is going to be angry if you take your child to the doctor, I mean, according to this woman you're talking about on Facebook, she says, well, if God's telling you that, then you better believe it, even though it sounds totally crazy. Well, it's horrible. It's like, no, if your child is sick, you take them to the doctor. And if you aren't willing to question whether your belief that God doesn't want you to take your child to the doctor, then you're going to do something really terrible. You're going to kill your own child, which is possibly the worst thing I can imagine anybody doing. And you're going to do that because you think God told you to. You have a moral obligation to question whether that's true.
Andrea Yates comes to mind.
I'm sorry?
Andrea Yates, I think she drowned her 3 children because she thought God wanted her to.
There's a personal experience of this is not long after I became an atheist, and my parents knew, because I was fairly open with them, but about it once I felt comfortable doing so. I asked my father. I asked him, if God told you to kill me, would you do that? And he responded by saying, he said, well, I'd have to be sure it was God telling me to do that. And I'm thinking,
how are you going to do that?
But my question presumed you already know that it's God, and he's telling you this. And he would not answer the question, except to say that, I take that back. He did answer the question initially, unhesitantly, saying, well, of course he would if God told him to. But he would have to first find out.
I heard it put another way on another show. It says, what is your God number? How many people would you kill for God if God told you to? My number is 0, and it should never be higher than 0.
Yeah. Well, that's really appalling. I mean, I'm so sorry to hear that. That must be awful to have your father tell you that. And and I suspect that it's probably not really true. I suspect that if he heard some voice in his head that he thought was God telling him to kill his son, he would probably actually think that's got to be wrong, that's got to be a mistake.
He'd probably think it's Satan.
I'm sorry?
He would probably think it's Satan.
He would go, that's not God.
But he could not fathom. He could not fathom why I was so upset by what he said at all. Like he could not understand why that was upsetting, because he'd raised me, of course, to be a Christian, and I was one.
Like Andrew Yates
so he couldn't understand why I would think otherwise.
That if God did tell him to kill you, and he did kill you, you'd just go to heaven. You'd be together later.
Well, if I were young enough, yes. So it's quite disturbing.
Anyway, we have Greta Christina's blog on the screen right now. Would you like to talk a little bit about your blog?
Sure, absolutely. I've been blogging since 2005, and actually blogging is a lot of what got me into atheism. I wasn't identifying as an atheist when I first started blogging, and I was starting to have some questions, identified as an agnostic and as a skeptic, and I was starting to have some questions. But it was through blogging and discovering other atheist blogs and starting to see some really good arguments for atheism and arguments against religion that I started really questioning some of my my kind of wishy-washy, well, I don't know what I think or not, and I don't really care about it. And it was really seeing some of these other atheist blogs, especially Daylight Atheism and Fringilla, was what got me into it. And it's a lot of what has gotten me, mostly participating in the atheist movement has been through the blog. And it's been a fascinating journey, a lot of ups and downs, but one of the things I love about blogging is that it's, in a lot of ways, it's kind of a classic meritocracy. You don't need to have a degree to do it. You don't need to have any special training to do it. You don't, essentially, if you're a good writer and a good thinker, and you're, reasonably good at, making connections with other bloggers and so on, you're going to do okay as a blogger. And eventually, it takes time, but and so that's one of the things that I always have this sort of, I don't know, not inferiority complex exactly, but there's times when I go, why is anybody listening to what I have to say? It's like, I'm not, I don't have any training in history, I don't have any training in philosophy, I don't have any special training in science. I'm just a smart, thoughtful person who can write, and it's kind of begun to dawn on me over time that actually a smart, thoughtful person who can write is something of a rare commodity, so I'm no longer shy about that.
But you're making good points, that stands on its own.
Exactly. And also, if you're willing to acknowledge when you're wrong and to change your mind. And that's been something that I've found very interesting about blogging, is because it is interactive. You write a blog and people write comments on it. It's a little different from, say, putting on a TV show or making a movie or writing a book. You get immediate feedback on your ideas, and you can interact. You can get into conversations with people in the comments. And I've changed my mind on a lot of ideas based on things that people said in comments to my blog, and I was like, oh, you know what, actually they're right, I need to change my mind about that.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, we're going to take just a second to go into our mid-program break. It probably won't take us 30 seconds. If you'll hold on for us, we'll come right back to you. If you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded by them and by individual contributions. Shows are live most every Tuesday from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, or daylight, depending, on Community Access Television. You can also see it streaming online outside Knoxville community by going to ctvknox.org.
This is the call-in show, and we are live today, September 18th, 2012. And viewers can call in now to the number on the screen or tweet them to us at FFTV Knox.
The Atheist Society of Knoxville, or ASK, meets 2 times a week. They have evening meetups for fun, drink, conversation, and food. ASK's purpose is to supply a venue for community, camaraderie, and outreach to the atheists, agnostics, freethinkers, and like-minded people in East Tennessee.
The Rationalists of East Tennessee has Sunday activities involving lively presentations and discussion of subjects topical and timeless. Twice a month on the first and third Sundays, they get together at Pellissippi campus for lectures and roundtable discussions. The second Sunday of the month, they meet at Barnes & Noble's for a book club. And the fourth Sunday of the month, they meet at a member's home for a potluck dinner and some fun conversation.
Both the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee help provide a social outlet where if you find that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Back to the program where we're talking to Greta Christina. She's recently put out a book called Why Are You Atheists So Angry? Greta, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much. I'm having a great time talking with you.
Excellent.
Cool. Did you have another area that you wanted to jump into real quick?
Good question. Well, some of what I talk about in the book, Why Are You Atheists So Angry, which, by the way, you can get it in print, you can get it on ebook, and it's on audiobook as well. And one of the things I talk about in the book is this idea that it's very common among religious believers that it doesn't really matter so much whether religion is true because it's useful and it makes people happy. And, it's like, why do you care? Why are you trying to argue people out of religion? It makes people behave better if they believe in heaven and hell. And anyway, and it comforts them, to think that they're going to, see their loved ones ones after they die, and so on. And there's this analogy I draw, which is I talk about Santa Claus. And I say, okay, so, lots of children believe that Santa Claus is real. And they probably, and it makes them very happy, they like hearing stories about Santa, and they like imagining the presents they're going to get under the tree, and so on. And they probably behave better, at least during the month of December. It's like, I'm sure lots of kids are like, oh, I think Santa's watching me, I better not, punch my brother. So it makes kids happy, and it makes kids behave better. But we don't think that kids should therefore continue to believe in Santa throughout their lives. We think that there's a point at which you should, become an adult or become an older kid and let go of that belief and accept reality. And, that you're not supposed to, if there were people who were building altars to Santa and, it's like eating, blessed, sacred, milk and cookies, for every Sunday, people would think that was ridiculous. And yet lots of people will entirely sincerely make the argument that it's perfectly acceptable for adults to believe in God, even if they don't see any good evidence for God existing, because it makes them happy. And so I would just like to ask people to ask that question. Why do you think it's reasonable to believe something that you don't have any good reason to think is true?
Right.
I recently finished reading a book called The Christians as the Romans Saw Them. It's a book put out by Yale University, where the author goes through different pagan critics of Christianity in the first 4 centuries. And one of the things he notes about their criticisms and the responses and such is that what attracted people originally was the lifestyle, and that Christianity spread at such a rate that it wasn't a matter of people fact-checking it. They just assumed it almost as if it were just true. And there was a lot of criticism about fideism, about just simply believing on faith, which was a common apology at the time. So it seems to have been that way for a while.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. We do have another caller come in now. We'd like to bring him on the show. Hold on a second. Welcome to Freethought Forum. Do you have a name or a nickname we can use?
Hello, caller.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes, may we have a name or a nickname?
Hi, I'm Alex.
Hello, Alex. Did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I had a few, I guess, and I wanted to start off perhaps with, what would you say is the number one focus we should have for our anger? Or is there a number one? Or is that a wrong question to ask? I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah. We talked about that early on in the show.
Okay.
Greta, would you like to recap what your answer on that?
Sure. Well, I want to clarify the question. Do you mean who or what we should be angry at, or what kind of action we should take?
Kind of the action we should take. What would be the great use of our time if we can get more people involved and organized?
Sure. So what kind of action we should take? Well, I definitely think the number one thing that atheists should do, if they can, is to come out of the closet, is to say that they're atheists, to say they're non-believers. That's definitely, that's a lesson we can learn from the history of the LGBT movement, which is one of the things that gay people found, very early on in the days of the gay movement, is that when people knew that they knew a gay person, they were a lot less likely to have hostility against gay people, and they were a lot less likely to have prejudice against gay people, and they were a lot more likely to support gay rights. And I think that's very much true for atheists. That as we come out of the closet and tell people that we're non-believers, that's going to change people's minds about atheists, and I think it's also going to change people's minds about religion. I mean, one of the things that I talk about is in the book as well as elsewhere is that religion requires social consent to perpetuate itself. It's not a very good idea. It doesn't have any good evidence to support it. It's never been the right idea. When you look at all of human history, whenever we've had an idea about how the world works, it's a supernatural idea. It's thousands upon thousands of times it's been replaced by a natural idea of cause and effect. And it's never happened the other way around. So religion is a bad idea, and it perpetuates itself by social consent. It perpetuates itself by people just not asking questions and just going along for the ride and just believing what they're told. And the more atheists, you don't even have to get into arguments if you don't want to, the more that atheists just say, I don't agree with that. It's like the story of the emperor's new clothes. The more people who are willing to say, actually, I don't see God, I don't see any supernatural effect in the world, all I see is the natural world, that's where the evidence points, and that's what I think. The more we come out about that, the easier it is for other people who are having their own questions and their own doubts about religion. They're going to find it easier to say, yeah, I kind of agree with that. And it's going to be harder for religious believers to perpetuate this social consent that religion relies on. So I think that coming out to the degree that we can, not everybody can come out of the closet. Some people, they're going to be in danger of losing their jobs, they're losing their families, losing their homes, getting thrown out of their house if they're younger, and so on. So, I don't encourage coming out if it's going to ruin your life, obviously, but coming out of the closet is really the number one thing that we can do. Beyond that, I am passionate about this idea. People should do whatever form of activism they are inspired to do, because that's what they're going to keep doing.
Okay, Alex, what were you saying?
I'm saying the numbers in the UK are higher in other countries. Do you think it's kind of gathering along mass there? Will we see that here?
I would think so. We're seeing an upswell. What do you think?
We're definitely seeing an upswell. We don't have the same numbers that they do in Europe in terms of non-believers, but we're definitely seeing an upswell. We're especially seeing an upswell among young people. I don't have the percentages off the top of my head, but the rates of non-belief among people who are 25 and under in the United States, it's dramatic. It's dramatically going up. And again, it's something that again, we see it in Europe, and I think that we're beginning to see it in America. Once people start to let go of the idea about religion, it makes it harder to perpetuate itself. So we're definitely seeing an upward trend, and we're especially seeing an upward trend among younger people. It's one of the reasons why I'm such a booster of the Secular Student Alliance, is that they're really doing this work of organizing in college and university and increasingly on high school campuses to help support students, because that's really where this movement is flourishing.
Okay, Alex?
Just one more question. Is it possible to be too angry?
Yes. It's definitely possible to be too angry, because...
I know it's kind of big.
Or at least too... well, I don't know. Your anger may be justified, but you can express it in poor ways.
Yeah.
That's what I would say. I don't know that it's so much possible to be too angry. I mean, when I think about things like, children dying because their parents believed in faith healing, I'm not sure it's possible to be too angry about that. I do think it's possible to express that anger in ways that aren't useful. That I definitely think, and I have seen this to a certain extent in the atheist community. People can be kind of bigoted against religious believers. They'll just say, oh, they're all just they're all stupid, they're all closed-minded, they're all weak, whatever. And I don't think that's true. And I think we need to remember, for instance, that most atheists used to be religious believers, and I'm really glad that when I was a religious believer, all the people who didn't think that I was just stupid and weak, and the people who thought, no, you're smart enough to get this, you're smart enough to get this idea. So I do think that anger can be expressed badly, but that's different from saying being too angry.
You can use it as a motivation without actually imparting the anger yourself to another person.
So, Alex, did you have anything else you wanted to ask or say?
No, I think that's all. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Alex.
All right.
Take care.
Phone lines are open.
All right.
Well, you were talking about Santa Claus, and when people say, that religion does good, and why should we question it? Why are we fighting against it? That's a very upbeat answer to it. I tend to go to the other direction, the dark side, if you will. I say, if you had cancer, would you want your doctor to tell you that you were perfectly well? And
that's a really good way of putting it,
what it is you want to know the truth. And if you can't back up an idea like God or religion or sin or souls or resurrection, if those don't have any representation in the real world, in the natural world, in the world we see every day, then they have no justification for being believed and basing your future on it and your actions.
Well, yeah, and it's I think that the cancer analogy is a really good one, because that's the thing. People will say, oh, well, what difference does it make whether I believe it because it makes me happy? Well, beliefs have effects. People act on their beliefs. Beliefs have effects in the real world. If you believe, and I'll give an example from my own life. I never believed in the Christian God of heaven and hell, but I used to believe in all this, like, New Age stuff, reincarnation and stuff like that. And, and I made decisions in my life based on that belief. I made a decision in my, I would, if I had some amazing opportunity come up, but I was just feeling lazy that day. I'd say, oh, I'm going to do that in my next life. I'm not going to do that this time around. Well, now I think that this life is all I have, and I don't have that many more years left in me. I'm 50 years old now. I maybe have, if I'm lucky, 30, 40 years left in me. I want to take advantage of opportunities when they come up, because I don't think I'm going to have another one. And that's the thing. People act on their beliefs. If you believe you don't have cancer, you're not going to take chemotherapy. And similarly, if you believe that you're going to live forever, you're not necessarily going to take advantages of opportunities in this life. And of course, all these other examples that we've been talking about, if you believe that God is going to punish you for sending your kid to a doctor, you're not going to take your kid to the doctor. If you believe that God is telling you to, mutilate your daughter's genitals, you're going to mutilate your daughter's genitals. It has real world effects, and it's not trivial.
It's also, one example that came up in mind earlier is also Jehovah's Witnesses and blood transfusions.
Exactly.
The refusal, and the effect that has on their children, even. So.
So we have, again, we have a moral obligation to try to understand as best we can how the world works, because that's how we know how to act in the world. If you think that, just think about cause and effect. If you think that if you drop a rock, it's not going to fall, you're gonna act differently than if you understand the truth, which is that if you drop a rock, it's gonna fall. And you need to know how the world works so that you can act in it, and you need to be willing to change your mind. If somebody shows you evidence that, hey, you thought the world worked this way, but really actually it works this other way, and you've been maybe causing some damage to yourself or other people because you've been acting on this belief that was wrong, you have an obligation to accept that you were mistaken and to change your mind.
The first thing that comes to mind to me when I think of religion and why it makes me angry is how it robs opportunities from children. Not only opportunities, but their health, as we were talking about earlier. But these are people that are dependent on other people for their livelihood, their education, their care, and they're being sold short. A benign example of this, people would think of the Amish. They have we value diversity. The Amish have their pastoral lifestyle, which is all great and stuff, but they don't think about the fact that the children of the Amish are denied education after the 8th grade. There could be some very potentially helpful people, Nobel laureates, physicists, doctors, born amongst them that will never realize their potential. And that's not even talking about the harm of health care and that type of thing.
I mean, I think, in the case of the Amish, it's more along the lines of, it just doesn't give them the range of options that I think they deserve. Not so much, the idea, I don't, all due respect, I don't buy the idea, these could become something amazing. I mean, not, that's like what I hear about pro-life. But, I do think it does decrease the children's options and what they could do should they desire to out in the rest of the world. With their lives.
Think about homeschooling. If homeschooling can be done well, I don't want to make enemies of everybody who's doing homeschooling. There are good ones out there. But at the same time, if you take a child and you keep it home and you don't teach it anything except one book,
and you don't have friends.
You don't have friends to keep them out of community. Then you're doing that child a disservice.
Indeed.
That's a real problem as well.
Well, exactly. Obviously, to at least some extent, parents have the right to bring up their child, their children according to their own values. But we do say as a society that there are limits to that. You know, we say that, you know, that you're expected, for instance, to educate your children. You're expected to give your children health care. You're expected to feed your children. You're expected to not, you know, physically abuse your children. And yet, when religion comes into the picture, somehow that expectation gets dialed back. You know, if you're, you know, depriving your children of health care, if you're depriving them of education, if you're physically abusing them, if you're emotionally abusing them, and you're doing it because of religion, somehow the bar for what constitutes abuse and deprivation gets set really, really high. And, you know, you have to just be a horrible parent if you're abusing your children or not educating them or neglecting them or not giving them health care. If you're doing it for religious reasons, you know, the state won't step in. You know, whereas if you're doing it just because you're a horrible parent, you know, the state will step in. And there's an expectation that children are, as you say, children are vulnerable. You know, if you don't get a good education, if you don't get good health care, if you don't get fed, if you are abused from a young age, it can really ruin the whole rest of your life, or really stunt the rest of your life. And, you know, so we understand that as a society that there are limits on what parents can do, you know, in terms of bringing up their children, and yet when religion comes into play, that expectation goes out the window, and it's really not okay.
There's a free pass, there's this paranoia, you know, because it's, and I think I can understand some of it too, like why people are so hesitant to make rules about it, with regard to, you know, our, you know, separation of church and state thing, which, you know, they often are, I find it interesting because so many Christians I've met, you know, they'll say, hey, you know, you can't get involved in my church or what my Christian-run business does, but we should be able to, you know, have our Christianity take over your government. But I think that you know, but the hypocrisy aside, I think that is the thing, is that, you know, there's all this concern of, are we legislating something that is religious and, you know, we shouldn't be legislating into? I think it's the paranoia that's unfortunately you know, just left alone, not questioned. It's kind of in a way superstitious about.
And yes, and there certainly are, you know, there's legitimate questions of separation of church and state and religious freedom in some of these questions. You know, but for instance, here's a good example. You know, if you have a church, you're expected to obey fire codes. You know, your church building is supposed to be up to code. You have to have fire exits, you know, and so on. And, you know, that's a good example of, you know, nobody says that it's an infringement of freedom of religion to expect a church to have fire exits. You know, and, you know, you wouldn't, for instance, say that, you know, if a religion was in favor of human sacrifice, you know, to take a very extreme example, you wouldn't say that, well, that's just their religion, so, you know, you'd say, well, no, the harm that's being done to this person who's being sacrificed, that outweighs, you know, these people's, you know, right to practice their religion however they want. And I think that when we are talking about children, that, you know, again, obviously, you know, there's a legitimate question about, you know, parents' right to raise their children as they want, but it does seem that there's a limit to that. And, you know, if the state can step in and say your church has to have fire exits, then I think the state can step in and say you have to educate your children.
Of course.
Well, the state has stepped in more than once, looking at Waco and the compound that was marrying their children off very early age. The state does take a stand against that, but it usually seems to be only in extreme cases.
But,
well, it's in extreme cases, or it's infringed religions. That's the other thing. The state's a lot less likely to step in abusive situations or situations of neglect, when it's a popular mainstream religion that's doing it.
True.
It's you know, and a lot of it too is that there are extremes. You know, there's things that they just don't care about, like fire codes, and then there's just things like human sacrifice that they would be caring about. But then there's this whole slew of things in the center, and a lot of them are like, why bother? You know, people have differing opinions as to, well, was that really worth fighting? So.
Yeah. We have less than 6 minutes left on the show. We invite your calls. The phone line is open. We have Greta Christina on the line, ready to answer any comments. Well, most anyway. 215-2288 in Knoxville. Any other questions? How would you define atheism? A lot of people ask me that, and I try to define it myself.
Well, the simplest the most narrow definition is that atheism means I don't believe in any gods. I don't believe in the Christian God. I don't believe in Allah. I don't believe in Zeus. I don't believe in Thor. That's as simple as ways. I don't believe that there are supernatural beings who are affecting the natural world in a conscious way. Now, that's just the most narrow definition of it, but that, and then I tend to broaden that. I don't believe in the supernatural world at all. In theory, you could not believe in gods, but you could still believe in a soul or reincarnation or so on. But I expand that. I'm an atheist and I'm also a materialist. I don't believe in any sort of supernatural world at all. And you could say, okay, well, that's just that one conclusion. All atheism means is you don't believe in any gods. But for me, that conclusion has implications. It's like almost any conclusion you come to, it has implications. And for instance, one of the implications that it has for me is this life is the only life we have, and therefore we need to make it valuable. And we're under an obligation to make it valuable for ourselves and for each other. For me, a lot of my morality and a lot of my sense of social responsibility comes out of my atheism and comes out of my sense that, this world is all there is. And so if there's somebody who's really suffering in this world, I have an obligation to try to do something about it if I can. And, so technically atheism just means, you don't believe in any gods. But for me, that expands to, to a sense of social responsibility and a sense of social justice.
Humanism in a word.
Yeah, humanism. Sometimes what I say is atheism plus not being a sociopath equals humanism. And I also identify as a humanist as well. I mean, I primarily identify as an atheist, but I also identify as a humanist. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we were talking about earlier about people pushing all kinds of ideas on the idea of atheism, but really all it really just means is I don't believe in God. That's basically it. But it does feed a lot of other ideas.
We have a caller. We have 3 minutes to go. Here we go.
Welcome to Freethought Forum. May we have a name or a nickname?
Yes, this is Sherry.
Sherry.
Hi, Sherry.
Hi.
Do you have a comment?
I just wanted to say that I watch you guys almost every week.
Oh.
I really love the show. But I'm so delighted that you have this wonderful guest on, and you can arrange that to have a person at a distance that you're interviewing, and you can talk to her at length, and then she can respond, and you can still talk. And I think that's a marvelous advance, and I want to thank Christina for being with us today.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thanks for your comment. And I just want to say, thank science. It's like the God didn't do that. But science and people who pay attention to reality are what's making this show possible. So thank you to computer scientists who made this technology possible.
Sherry, do you have? We have about a minute or so left. Do you have a question or you'd like to ask Greta? Or
no, I just think she's been a wonderful guest for you all to interview, and I just wanted to thank her and to thank you all for having her on. Goodbye.
Okay. All right, thank you, Sherry.
Thank you.
Okay. We have about a minute left before we need to go into closing the show. We'd like to turn that over to you to make some closing comments or calls for, well, not calls for action, but
again, I mean, it's like, you're talking about how, atheism, strictly speaking, just means not believing in any gods. And strictly speaking, that's true. But for a lot of atheists, and not for all atheists, but I think for a lot of atheists, that conclusion has implications. And for a lot of us, it means we want to take action. And it means that we want to take action both to make the world better for other atheists, to make the world better for ourselves as atheists, to try to persuade people out of religion, and also just to try to make the world a better place in general, because this life is the only one we have. There's no God who's going to make it all better. We're the only ones who are going to make it all better. So it's up to us to make that happen.
Right. Don't put off that reconciliation for the next life, because it's not going to be there.
All right. Okay.
Well, thank you, Greta. Thank you very much for your time and your well thought out ideas.
All right.
We'll be getting back to you, I'm sure.
All right. We're going to go through the closing.
Okay. Thank you. It's time to wrap things up now. Get out your pen and paper. This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
Please send us feedback. Leave voicemail at 865-272-9060 or email us at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com.
You can see this show every Tuesday at from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock Eastern Time in Knoxville Station. Usually it's Comcast Channel 12. Or on ctvknox.org streaming.
We would like to send thanks to our staff, Sam, Jonas, and Forrest for technical support, and to the staff here at CTV Knox, and to all our callers. Remember to examine your beliefs, and what is real has nothing to fear from examination.
Be with us next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.